Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Dr. Danelle Bickett-Weddle from the Center for Food Security and Public Health at Iowa State University. It's our pleasure to co-host these presentations with the Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. We're really glad you're joining us today. Our first speaker is our state veterinarian, Dr. Jeff Kaisand. He's been with IDALS since 2013 and has served when he started out as the assistant state veterinarian for 6 years before being appointed as the state veterinarian. Dr. Kaisand works with federal, state, and industry partners to protect the health of Iowa's livestock industry and develop foreign animal disease response plans. He was an integral part of the state's response during the avian influenza outbreak in 2015. Dr. Kaisand earned his bachelor's degree in animal science at Iowa State University in 1989 and graduated from the College of Veterinary Medicine, also at Iowa State, in 1993. Dr. Kaisand.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Bickett-Weddle. I'd also like to thank Dr. Bickett-Weddle for her help and the Center for Food Security on the workshop series we've been putting on and the help here today too. And she'll actually also be presenting today, so I'd like to introduce her. Dr. Danelle Bickett-Weddle has been an associate director since 2004 at the Center for Food Security and Public Health at Iowa State University. She also supports disaster preparedness and biosecurity efforts for ISU Extension and Outreach, Ag, and Natural Resources. Prior to joining Iowa State, she practiced in South Dakota and worked with the dairy industry in the upper Midwest. She received her DVM and PhD degrees from Iowa State University and an MPH degree from the University of Iowa. She is board certified by the American College of Veterinary Preventative Medicine. She is passionate about biosecurity and making it practical and applicable to livestock producers. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And as I ended there is Dr. Bickett-Weddle's passion for biosecurity and making it practical. That's, I think, what's the topic we'd like to cover today. And I think probably in our workshop series and the different topics we've covered, I think biosecurity probably is arguably the most important one we're going to cover. And as we go through this today, I hope everybody will see why that is so. Some of the things we want to cover today are just the benefits to putting biosecurity measures in place today. As we do our foreign animal disease preparedness, we always also like to make sure that we're making it applicable to every day. And biosecurity is one of those practices that you reap benefits every day if you have it in place. Another thing we want to cover today is assessing the risk of different movements coming on and off of farms. We'll give you some list of practical biosecurity resources that you can use on your farm, and also decide some other resources for enhanced biosecurity in case of a foreign animal disease introduction. So biosecurity always isn't easy, and there's challenges with biosecurity. Sometimes people equate it to insurance. Disease prevention equals insurance, and it's not. It's hard to, a lot of times people will try and derive return on investments or measure what you're spending on it in your return. Insurance is kind of like every day when you get up, you don't decide whether you're going to pay for car insurance that day or not. It's either in place or it's not. You don't have the idea whether you're going to have an accident and even anybody that farms has row crops. Last year was a good example that if crop insurance, who would have ever dreamed we'd have a derecho and have crops wiped out? So it was, but you had to decide before that happened because you had no idea it was coming, whether you had crop insurance or not. So paying premiums, you pay them and hope that you never use them, but you have to have them in place. Same thing with biosecurity practices. If you aren't practicing biosecurity every day, it's a natural, I wouldn't say a habit, but a natural practice. It needs to be in place all the time, and you hope you never need it. When it's working, you never know. Diseases you can't see, so you don't know when disease is knocking at the door of your farm. But if you've got biosecurity in place and keeping it off, that's the goal. Sometimes it's whether it's shortage of labor, training people, whether it's family members, labor that you hire, they also have to practice biosecurity every day. And sometimes when time's short, people want to cut corners, but that's the time not to. And the thing to always keep in mind with biosecurity, it's the weakest link that will get us in trouble. So everybody on the farm every day has to practice biosecurity. So what's at risk? There's a lot at risk in Iowa. Our large animal agriculture population, all of the animals that we have in Iowa are at risk every day. And even for the diseases we list here, we're at risk every day. Foot and mouth disease, virulent Newcastle, high path avian influenza, classical and African swine fever. When we talk about the global animal health situation and these diseases, and actually if you look at the foot and mouth disease, where it's at in the world, we're probably one of the minority. I mean, we are kind of a minority in a country that does not have foot and mouth. So it's very important that we remember biosecurity and the things that are risk every day. We're kind of already laying the groundwork here, but if you don't have any biosecurity, you're vulnerable to disease introduction onto your farm. And we'll use the next few slides here to kind of demonstrate some firewalls that you can put in place. So one of the things that, introductions of animals onto your farms is the way that disease could get onto your farm. So one of the ways that you can protect your farm from diseases entering from new introductions is to isolate those animals. So you can see here, we've put in a couple firewalls. The first thing is animals come in, that's a place to stop and think about what could be entering your farm. And then if you put them into quarantine for a period of time, that allows you to understand whether there's disease entering your farm or not, gives you the ability to test for diseases and make sure that you're not bringing something into your farm. The next level that we talk about as a firewall is state entry requirements. So when we think of not just the farm level, but we think of the herd as the state of Iowa, all animals in Iowa, that's some of the examples of state entry requirements that we have to protect the herd in Iowa. So that's an important piece of why we have entry requirements, testing, making sure the health status of animals coming into Iowa are protected. So another place that's a firewall that's important is our US border. Animals, not just animals, but people coming back from foreign countries, that's one of the critical places that we have a firewall that's built into place. There's been a lot of discussions in the past years of, beagles at airports and making sure that people don't bring back food that could have foreign animal diseases in it. Reminders to people that travel to foreign countries and go onto farms, and even just animal introductions coming into the United States. So that firewall is important. One of the things here and why we mention and kind of describe it as firewalls, modern agriculture has become very efficient, and that's a very good thing. But as we've become very efficient in modern agriculture, some of these firewalls have been taken out. And so one of the things that we really stress and emphasize to producers is to put as many of those firewalls back into place, because it's very important to keep disease off of your farm. And Dr. Bickett-Weddle, if you could go backwards, I wanted to show something, and go backwards one more. So one of the last, we talk about foreign animal diseases. To the best of our knowledge, there's no foreign animal diseases such as foot and mouth, African swine fever, classical swine fever on any farms in the United States right now. So as we mentioned, and we talk about foreign animal disease planning, we talk about keeping it in a foreign country. We just mentioned that the border, and we check it at the border of the United States. So keep it in a foreign country, check it at a border. But the last line of defense, the last firewall, is keeping a foreign animal disease off of your farm. So that's why we stress it's very important to have a good biosecurity plan on your farm, because the last place that we keep a foreign animal disease off of a farm is that last firewall from entering a farm. So we can't stress enough the importance of biosecurity and keeping things off the farm. So that's why even everyday diseases, it's very important to keep them off your farm, but also foreign animal diseases. So let's talk just a little bit about how pathogens enter or leave an animal. And as we talk about these, kind of keep in mind not only the animal and where pathogens get in and leave, but think about the other things that are associated with that on a farm, whether it's manure disposal, milk trucks leaving a farm, animals leaving a farm, animals coming on. So, pathogens can enter an animal if we're giving them injections. That's a way, if we're not using new needles or clean needles on every animal, we can move pathogens from animal to animal that way. Eyes are a place that often aren't thought about, but diseases can enter the body through the eyes, but also can be secreted. You think about endemic diseases. We have pink eye in cattle. That's the bug can be on the eye and transmitted, or secretions that come out of the eye is a place that it can move to other animals. Nasal secretions, flu in pigs, as pigs exhale and flu comes out in some of the nasal secretions, or aerosolized out the nose. Foot and mouth disease, when we talk about foot and mouth disease, this pathway is a huge one. Pigs are classified more as virus amplifiers for foot and mouth disease, which means it's hard for them to become infected with FMD, but once they are, they replicate a lot of virus. And every time they exhale a lot of virus in their breath. And cattle, it is easier for them to become infected. They're not a virus amplifier, but it's easier for them to become infected. It's the same route. As they breathe in air that has virus in it, they can become infected. The mouth is another good place that is animals are eating things or chewing on things. That's a good way for pathogens to get in. The umbilical cord, if you think about newborn animals, whether it's a calf, a pig, or anything, when they're first born, when that umbilical cord is wet, it's a good place for pathogens to enter and go up the umbilical cord and enter the body. So that's a good place a pathogen can get in. Milk's kind of important when we talk about FMD, that it can be shed in milk. So other and endemic diseases, and it's good. Well, shouldn't say endemic diseases, but TB, brucellosis, those are diseases that are all but eradicated. We don't in the United States, but those are also places that those diseases can be shed. Semen can be a source of disease transmission, as well as urine and feces. The genital tract, when we talk about diseases that we have, whether it's brucellosis, trichomoniasis, but those are diseases we have that can be shed in the genital tract. So again, keep in mind not only endemic diseases, but foreign animal diseases and those routes. And when we start talking about foreign animal diseases, how do we dispose of manure that could be infected with a foreign animal disease? Milk moving from a farm, and how do we monitor for foreign animal diseases if we have an FMD outbreak? So it's keep in mind those routes that animals can be infected and shed viruses or bacteria, and importance of having good biosecurity practices on farms for endemic diseases, but also keeping in mind what might happen during a foreign animal disease. Next slide. So hopefully we're starting to, again, even reinforce more the benefits to biosecurity now, common diseases, similar routes, and and we'll kind of lay a corollary here between similar routes of transmission of endemic diseases and unknown diseases. So BVD transmission looks like an awful lot like FMD transmission. BVD can be transmitted by direct contact, blood, saliva, feces, urine, reproductive fluids, can be transmitted on fomites. So, if you've got manure that's contaminated feces and you share equipment, manure spreaders with neighbors, going back and forth, that can be a way that you can transmit disease from your farm to another farm. Oral transmission, so if you have a manure spreader that you share with a neighbor and they have BVD, take it back to your farm and animals consume feces that could have came from that neighboring farm, urine, milk from infected animals. And so similar in FMD transmission, that also can be direct contact, same routes, blood, saliva, feces, urine, reproductive fluids, again, fomites. And again, here if we're practicing good biosecurity on a normal basis, I mentioned manure spreaders, anything you share, make sure you're cleaning, disinfecting that, because that's the same thing that happens during a foreign animal disease outbreak, that you've got to make sure that you have some of those firewalls in place, that if you're sharing equipment, make sure that you're cleaning and disinfecting them so you're not at risk if your neighbor gets a foreign animal disease or you get a foreign animal disease and you don't realize it until it's too late. So again, fomites, again, similar oral, feces, urine, those are all ways that FMD can be transmitted. So again, if you want more information that might be helpful in understanding some of those disease transmission risks, the Center for Food Security and Public Health has on their website more information that is very helpful to understand the transmissions and also helping to put some biosecurity plans in place on your farm. So again, benefits of biosecurity now. We don't want to just talk about a foreign animal disease outbreak. So if you have a good biosecurity plan in place now in your farm, what that means is less disease challenges to your animals, which means better health of your animals. If your animals are being challenged every day by different diseases, it stresses their immune system and it weakens it, and just makes them more susceptible to more other diseases, and also decreases their production. So again, if we decrease that infectious load, infectious burden, animals are healthier. And there is a component of that if an animal's stressed, it takes less of a dose to make them become positive to a disease. So if they're stressed, it takes less of an infectious dose for them to become positive. So the healthier the animal, the more likely they are to fight off disease. So it's very important to keep them healthy and keep those disease challenges down. And so in the end, when we talk about measuring that return, the healthier the animals, the better off they are, and the economic benefits that are received from that. So IDALS goals are to protect the health of the Iowa herd flock, and some of the ways that we do that is, again, promoting improved biosecurity practices every day. So again, it's protecting from those common diseases, and also the uncertain risk is protecting from a foreign animal disease. Hopefully, and I've indirectly said it so far, but those firewalls we described, if we have a foreign animal disease outbreak, if you don't have good biosecurity practices in place now, you're at a lot higher risk of becoming infected with a foreign animal disease, because you may not have the time, most likely will not have the time, to implement those biosecurity practices to protect your farm. Again, if it's not easy to put those firewalls back into place. Biosecurity is a habit. It needs to be done as a second nature every day. And we just mentioned the benefits, the economic benefits. In the last several years, there's a couple good examples of the people that had good biosecurity and how they benefit from it. If you remember back when PED was introduced into the United States, producers that stayed negative from PED, the markets went up, and that they didn't suffer the losses from PED, the mortality. They benefited greatly from the better production and being able to sell more animals during a market that was higher. During avian influenza, there was a period of time after we broke with avian influenza, we were short eggs. In fact, we were going to foreign countries looking for eggs to import them into the United States. So producers that had good biosecurity in place did not become infected with avian influenza, greatly benefit economically by keeping those avian influenza off their farm. So it's whether it's every day and keeping endemic diseases off or during a foreign animal disease, we can't stress the importance enough of having biosecurity in place now. So what diseases do you worry most about? Some of the common endemic ones, whether it's Salmonella, PRRS, Mycoplasma, PED, mastitis, or whether it's some of the foreign animal diseases, avian influenza, foot and mouth disease. Whichever one those are, it's a good idea to work with a veterinarian. I haven't mentioned that one, but please, we stress the importance, and we're not going to cover every last detail of how to protect or have a biosecurity plan in place on your farm, but would encourage you, and we'll give some resources here in a few minutes, but work with a veterinarian, understand what your challenges are in your farm, which diseases are that you're most concerned about, but put in a good biosecurity plan to make sure you're protected.
Thanks, Dr. Kaisand. That really kind of set the stage for one of the new biosecurity projects. So IDALS worked with our center to write a proposal in the fiscal year of 2019 for Farm Bill funding, the NADPREP program. And so our goals are to increase awareness of biosecurity practices. We're going to share with you some of the resources that are created and available, with more to come, on how to implement those practices, focusing on reducing that exposure risk through the different routes. Again, it's all trying to get everybody thinking more about readiness for that foreign animal disease. How do we put those firewalls in place? So I'll share with you some more information on that today. So when you think about it, there's a lot of folks that have never experienced this novel or highly contagious disease outbreak. COVID gave us a glimpse into it from the human aspect, but, short of avian influenza, there's some industry folks that have just never had to experience it, which is great from an animal health standpoint, but it, might leave people a little more vulnerable. And that's really where that enhanced biosecurity is going to be needed. We know our animals are never free from risk of disease exposure, but how do we help producers, get to that next level? So if you haven't done anything to start with, getting to that higher level of enhanced biosecurity can be a pretty big leap. So all big journeys, right? It could be a big journey to get to enhanced biosecurity, begin with small steps. So I know if Dr. Kaisand and I were standing at the two ladders, I would definitely pick the one on the left, given how tall I am. He'd probably be fine to grab that next one and go. But, a lot of folks might struggle with that a little bit. So one of the project goals was to come up with those steps in between. Maybe people just need some place to get started and don't know where to go. So we've got some resources we'll talk about there. Maybe some folks are doing a little bit more already and just want to get it, better, doing things more on a daily basis. So that way you've got that stair step up if we ever do get to a foreign animal disease threat for our livestock. So some of the biosecurity levels, the resources that we're creating, a lot of folks in the Midwest have more than one species on farm. And so some of these diseases might just pick on one of the livestock, but some might pick on several. So we've got some resources addressing across multi-species for one farm, basic checklist, basic plan template. We've got some videos coming up on the species specific, right? A lot of resources there as well that we'll share with you today. When it comes to poultry, we've got the National Poultry Improvement Plan, NPIP, Standard E, and resources already exist there. So part of this project is just to promote awareness of that. A lot of infographics we'll share with you today as well. And these all get us to that species-specific enhanced biosecurity. So you may have heard of the secure food supply plans. All of these materials, get people towards that end of that really enhanced high-end biosecurity that may have to occur. All right, so next we're going to talk about movement risks. So how do we assess some of those different movements that come onto and off of an operation? So we know to run a farm, right, we've got to move things on and off, but the risk is something could be introduced. So how do we identify those risks? Well, one of the biggest risks is animals, right? So like species can carry the same type of organisms that we have on our operation, whether it's poultry or hoof stock. So, it might be just going to a livestock show, or maybe you've got grazing ground and you're commingling with other species. So bringing those back onto an operation could pose a risk. Animal products, especially if they've not been treated in any way to inactivate any potential organisms. So products like semen and embryos, we can't really treat those, but we need to make sure that they're coming from a clean source, right? That home herd, that home flock has been tested to make sure that they're negative. Deliveries, lots of deliveries coming onto and off of a farm. And so if that vehicle or equipment has been on other livestock operations, that's where one of the risks can lie. Removals. Seems kind of odd to think that things leaving your farm could introduce disease, but how is that item leaving? So is it a dead animal and a vehicle needs to come on and pick it up? Or do you allow them to drive on your operation knowing that they're picking up dead animals at other livestock operations? Where was it before, right? Maybe you share livestock equipment. Manure, litter removal, same kind of thing. So vehicles that go farm to farm, we really want to think about where do you allow them to drive on your operation? And lastly, two-leggeds, right? The personnel. So we know we've got to have people on and off our farms to take care of our animals every day, but do they have direct contact on other operations? What happens here? So some of the biosecurity steps we'll talk about focus on that. So one of the new resources that's available on the center's website, and you can see the web link we'll have periodically throughout the presentation on the screen, is this movement risk document. Just a 2-pager. You can click on it all you want. But we are asking folks to just kind of think through a typical week or maybe a typical month if you don't move a whole lot. What are some of those risks that are happening on a daily basis or a weekly basis? Not to say that one is maybe more risky than another, but some of them are. We just went through that. But focus effort on that first. Things that happen frequently, right, increase your risk of something getting through a firewall. So what initial biosecurity steps could be put in place? We've got a lot of resources we'll share with you today. All right, Dr. Kaisand, you want to talk about one of those risks?
Sure. And as you mentioned, frequent versus infrequent movements on and off of farms, animal introductions is one of those. So those planned animal introductions, are you bringing animals in even daily, weekly, monthly, yearly? The less entries you have onto a farm, the less risks there are. But sometimes that isn't always possible, and you have to introduce animals more often. So one of the biggest things, though, to make sure you're doing in those animal introductions is make sure you're finding out the source herd information or flock, the status, and making sure you're matching up that health status with your farm, so you're not bringing something onto your farm that either you don't already have or you don't want. Make sure you're isolating those animals and quarantining them for a period of time to make sure that you're not bringing something in, because oftentimes diseases are not very apparent, or you can have animals that carry diseases that you can't see. So you may want to do some testing and make sure that when you bring those animals in, you're not bringing in something you're not seeing. So it's very important to isolate them, quarantine them, and make sure that you're doing testing to not bring something in. Single source, whether you're bringing from one source or multiple sources, but single sourcing is always very important. Not the more, again, it's like multiple entries, but if you bring from multiple sources, you run a higher risk of bringing something in. So again, it's important to make sure you're working with a veterinarian to have a good plan in place. Make sure your veterinarian's talking with the source herd or flock to make sure they understand what diseases they could have. and make sure they're not bringing something in. So as you do that, they should be working with those, the source herd, and finding out what the statuses are, what should you test for, making sure that you get those. And a good point is to make sure you have the test results before you bring animals into your farm and not just assume they're going to be negative. Making sure that when you do set up that quarantine period for animals that are coming in, make sure that's a solid quarantine, which means, you know, they are truly separate from your herd, whether that's at if you have the advantage of having an off-site isolation quarantine facility for your farm. If you don't, if it's nearby your other animals, make sure it's an appropriate distance away from them so disease won't be transferred. And then make sure that people that are doing chores and taking care of those animals are putting good biosecurity practices in place, that whether they change clothes, whether they shower, any equipment that they use for those animals is separate from the herd, that they're not transmitting. You know, if you're going to go to the effort to isolate and quarantine animals, make sure every piece of it sounds, so you're not taking something from those quarantined animals back into your herd. So again, if it's doing chores in the quarantine animals at the end of the day, don't take any of the feeding equipment from there back to your other animals. Just make sure you sit down, work with your veterinarian, think through all of the pieces of what's a sound quarantine practice for incoming animals into your farm, and making sure then that everybody also practices that on the farm.
So besides animal introductions, right, we talked about deliveries and removals. So there's two other ways that things could be introduced. So the livestock trailer, right? Where was it prior? Was it clean between loads? So assessing that risk, if you're emptying, a barn or, your own animals for a period of time, do you need to clean and disinfect in between each load? Maybe not, but where are you going, right? So where's that destination? We know that things can be picked up on feet, at offloading when we go to a slaughter plant. So, just really thinking through, you got to think like the virus, right? How might it get in? So trying to break those transmission routes wherever possible is the goal. You see picture on the bottom, milk trucks, right? They go from farm to farm, and it's not uncommon that the baby calves are all housed right up by the milk house, right? Because that's their food source. So, do we want that milk truck that might be picking up salmonella or Ionis or BVD on the tires, right, from the previous farm and bringing it to yours? So again, just thinking about how many different ways things could be introduced and how you could break it. Pictured on the right is a turkey loader. So this piece of equipment is fantastic, right? It really helps make it more efficient and more calm for the animals to be loaded out of a turkey facility. But you don't, necessarily everybody doesn't just buy one of these and let it sit around because it isn't used all that frequently. So moving these things farm to farm, shared equipment during HPAI was one of the identified risks of disease spread. So it's really important to take steps, to minimize that coming onto a farm. So next, we're going to see a little video that's going to show, just a vehicle and how it drives, the person getting out, and how things might be carried farm to farm. So that's
as we look for high-risk events, watch and see how pathogens may be tracked onto the farm with these demonstrations.
This example shows how a vehicle or farm equipment could transfer a pathogen onto the farm. This example shows how pathogens could be picked up on the shoes of the farmer, caretaker, or visitors while off the farm.
So just a good visual there to kind of show you how how something could be carried back and forth. So what should your policies be for your personnel and vehicles? Again, we've got signs available on the center's website. There's signs at a lot of your commodity groups. The biggest thing is just determine, what risk are you willing to put up with and what aren't you? And then give guidance, right? I've driven onto farms before and didn't know where to park, didn't know where to go in. Sometimes you wander around a little bit. And so if that's important to you, right, putting those firewalls in place, then use the tools that are available to help communicate that to your visitors. Now, if we flip that a little bit and we were to get into a foreign animal disease and we needed to biocontain it, right? We want to make sure that we are not spreading disease off an infected farm. IDALS had a project with us at the center, as well as Iowa State University Extension, to create it's a 16-minute video. It's available on the IDALS YouTube page, but it goes through the principles of cleaning and disinfection and setting that up on a farm so that you can contain that foreign animal disease. So again, all those resources are available again because it's such a critical control point for the state. Dr. Kaisand?
Sure. And so we wanted to point out a few of those key points that you should have included in a biosecurity plan. And as we go through these points, it's also important that if we have a foreign animal disease outbreak, these are also pieces of information we'll need. Whether if you were to by chance become an infected farm or have connections to an infected farm, these are the points that we're going to ask and try and figure out where disease may already be or that hasn't been identified. So it is important for many reasons to have a good biosecurity plan that involve these things. Animal movements on and off a farm, we've kind of already described that, the importance of making sure animals are healthy, but just to make sure that even the trucks hauling them, whatever pieces are going in animal movements on and off the farm, make sure that there's a good biosecurity plan for that to happen. Vehicles and equipment. You got a little glimpse of the video there of equipment going on and off a farm, and in a heightened awareness or heightened level of biosecurity, some things that may be done to get things on and off a farm, but keep things in, just as mentioned earlier, as simple as borrowing a manure spreader from a neighbor and what's the good biosecurity practice to have in place for that. Personnel, always be aware if you have, whether it's family members that maybe go over and help the neighbor load pigs, load cattle, load out poultry or whatever it is, make sure you're keeping in mind good biosecurity practices there, whether they're changing clothes, showering. Don't come back into your herd till the next day. If you have people that you hire, if it's load crews, we just saw the picture of a turkey loader, but if people are moving from site to site, make sure they are practicing good biosecurity. Carcass disposal. If you shared when Dr. Bickett-Weddle had the map of a farm and rendering coming on and off of farms, and if they run a route, make sure that where they're picking up dead animals, carcasses, is it a place where there's not a lot of cross traffic with other people on the farm or equipment, feed trucks, tractors. Just make sure there's good practice there in place. Manure, litter, bedding management, wildlife, rodents, again, even compost piles. We worry about, birds, eagles, turkey vultures coming in and grabbing dead animals out of compost piles, but make sure there's good practices in place for wildlife. Rodents are a good place that are good vector to carry, fomite to carry disease, and even feed and water. There's been a lot of discussions in the past couple of years with the potential introduction of a foreign animal disease via feed. So make sure you have a good plan in place for your feed and water. So we're going to go through here some examples of practical biosecurity resources. The first one is our own website, the IDALS website. We've got quite a few pieces of information, links to other resources, but our IDALS website is a good place to, if you want to start and start looking for some biosecurity resources.
The USDA website, especially when it comes to the poultry piece of it, Defend the Flock is big. And you'll see on the screen on the right-hand side is that checklist for adding or replacing poultry. So they go through a variety of the NPIP, National Poultry Improvement Plan, Standard E, biosecurity recommendations. And it really doesn't matter your flock size, right? The virus standing on the outside doesn't care if you have 5 birds on the other side of that fence or 5,000, right? So thinking through what some of the principles are, these resources work very well for all of that. And so again, USDA's resource, if you go to the Iowa Poultry Association, they link to the USDA. They also link to the poultrybiosecurity.org website that's got checklists and templates and all kinds of resources for you as well. The Pork Store, funded by the Pork Checkoff, they have a series of a lot of different biosecurity resources, and several of them are pictured here as well. So, just go to your favorite search engine and type in the Pork Store, and you'll be able to see all kinds of resources, whether it's for daily biosecurity or specific to PEDV or foreign animal diseases as well. Our center website, hot off the presses, this was just recently released. Again, this is the NADPREP funded project, along with some colleagues at Iowa State who received funding from NEFA as well. And so I want to thank my colleagues, Dr. Katie Sinneroden, Dr. Glenda Dvorak, Dr. Renee Duell. We've had some great students, Hope Dolman, working on this. Our IT and graphics team has really put a lot of effort to get resources in, and more are being added. One of our hot topics is always disinfection. And so if you are curious, what works best? We have a question in the Q&A about feed bags, right? What do you do with feed bags that come back from a mill? Well, technically, unless you're letting your animals lick the feed bags, right, there's some prevention practices you can put in place. So the feed bag itself, unless the animal's having direct contact with it, you might be the person that's the source, right? So you might store that feed bag in a place where the animals don't get access to it. And then good hand hygiene, right? Anytime you're handling that, if it's, I'm not a very big person, I pick up a 50-pound bag of feed, it's going to be touching me, right? And so if I have concerns, whether it's a bag of feed or, a calf I pick up at somebody else's farm, right? It's your personal artifacts. So your clothing, your hats, your footwear, all of those things, if you're touching things you're concerned with, then make a change, right? Or clean things up before you go contact your animals that might be susceptible. So these resources here on disinfection talk through, what might work well, just like antibiotics, right? We got to pick the right antibiotic when our animals are sick. We got to pick the right disinfectant to go up against the disease organism. And your veterinarian is a great resource for that as well. So some of the biosecurity resources that we have, we're going to demonstrate next. So we're going to talk through the 3 different steps and where people might jump in and get started, share with you some of the tip sheets or infographics, and talk about the videos that are in development. So if folks are, done that step 1 on movement risks, and then they're like, well, where do I go next? We've got these resources for you. So whether it's a mixed species farm, we've got the livestock and poultry, or maybe you just raise one species. We got them for dairy cattle, beef cattle, poultry, and swine, and sheep. So just some quick questionnaires to get you thinking about where some of your vulnerabilities might be. So here's a list of the topics that are in there. Zoonotic disease and agritourism. We have a lot of our small producers that were part of my colleagues group that gave feedback on that we want to make sure we're doing that safe. So we've got questions in each of these category areas. Now, if we flip to the species specific, we've got a few different ones. And the reason being is all of these align with the enhanced biosecurity plans that you might find on the secure pork or beef or milk or sheep websites. So again, consistency, but starting, for people that just want to get started, or maybe people that are at that daily want to do a little bit more, all the way up to the enhanced. So consistency in the message was our goal. So maybe you've done your movement risks and you've dug in a little deeper and you're like, hey, I'm ready to jump in and write a plan, and my veterinarian, can help me with this. So we've got these plan templates available for the species as well. Now, one of the cool, fun success stories of this project, on the beef side, so we've got step 1, step 2, and then when it came to step 3, my colleague, Dr. Katie Sinneroden, and I had the opportunity to work with the beef quality assurance team on the creation of this daily biosecurity plan. So it's consistent. So whether you land on it and then want to work backwards through a few other things, or you land on ours and want to work forwards, the goal is just to get people thinking about what are some things you can put in place to help protect your herd or your flock from disease exposure. Again, those different firewalls. It's all consistent with secure beef supply plan. So if you're really trying to get to that level for your herd, all of these resources are consistent. So where can you learn more? Maybe you asked your questions about animal health and disease monitoring, and you're like, well, now what? We have these things called tip sheets. They're all written in a way that are aimed to answer your questions. There's more resources at the end. And just like the checklist, for every topic we have on the checklist, we have tip sheets. So they're either posted on the website or in the final phases of development. If we take a look at the cleaning and disinfection one, our question today, led to that. It's a very common question. How do I do this right? This is just a 5-page, very colorful, graphic-heavy document that walks you through it. The very last page has the checklist items that you'd find in the bigger checklist. So we really know people are going to land on, Google, right? You're going to search your phone and look for information. So whichever piece you land on, it'll refer you back to other resources and try to get you the tools that you need to help protect your herd and flock. Now we talked about, what are the benefits of putting biosecurity in place now? So we've created these infographics and you can see the species listed, but again, just getting information out on social media. Maybe you put on educational trainings and you want a handout. We rolled these out to my colleagues in Iowa State Extension, and they gave us the great idea to just make a short PowerPoint that can be run at the beginning of other meetings, just to promote, there's economic consequences. How are diseases spread? But more importantly, how can you keep diseases out? And here's just a picture page of all the different infographics that we've got available. So if training other people is something that you do or you're interested in, we're setting the dates for 2 sessions. The content is very Iowa-centric because that's who funded it, right? The NADPREP funding came to focus on Iowa and foreign animal disease preparedness. And then my colleagues, again, with the NEFA funding on kind of the upper Midwest region, we're welcoming national attendees to join us. We're going to demonstrate the resources. We do ask that anybody that uses the information fills out an online report form just so we know who's getting the information as the end user. And then we've got a feedback form that was, again, part of our project. We want to make sure that, if you have suggestions for improvement or things or different ways to use things, we want to hear from you. So if you go to our website, you can see the link there. If you want to be invited to one of the sessions, just go ahead and fill that out and we'll get you information to register. A complementary biosecurity project that kind of spun off of this was, similar to what we did with the beef quality assurance team. This is working with the farm program, Farmers Assuring Responsible Management on the dairy side. So working with the National Milk Producers Federation, the center is a subcontractor with them. And this project is very much focused on how do we get more biosecurity information into that farm program, focusing on several of the best management practices that Dr. Kaisand mentioned today. And then again, harmonizing that with the secure milk supply plan. So folks that are doing things, in a stair-step manner are getting up to that enhanced biosecurity. So stay tuned for more information there. And then we'll just wrap today with some of those enhanced biosecurity resources. So in a foreign animal disease, it's not different than today when it comes to the producer aspect, right? So you decide what firewalls you're going to put in place and, what groups of animals you want to buy and quarantine or testing, anything like that. You're still in charge of preventing exposure at the individual operation level. What changes with a foreign animal disease is Dr. Kaisand and his colleagues at the state and the USDA then are responsible for protecting the state herd or the national herd, right? And they're the ones making the decisions on, what does that look like? What kind of tests do we need? What kind of information do they need to grant a movement permit? So really, it's a partnership. Everybody that was in charge of their farm is still in charge of their farm, but we really want to make sure we're protecting that herd and that flock at the state level. It goes without saying, I think, that biosecurity can be expensive and it can be somewhat inconvenient for people, right? Changing clothes, washing your hands more. Oh my goodness, switching out of the truck that leaves the farm versus the one that stays on the farm. That requires time and extra steps. I'll tell you on the flip side, losses from foreign animal disease infection, they're very expensive. And the disease lesions they cause in these animals is very inconvenient. So, we got to weigh that return on investment we've talked about. We know that our routine biosecurity is not going to protect against foreign animal disease viruses by and large, but we've got to do everything we can to get ready for it, to protect us in the everyday. And if we look at what happened in the 2001 foot and mouth disease outbreak in the United Kingdom, this was unpublished research out there that good biosecurity procedures were farms that had those were 5 times less likely to become infected. I know I like to eat. I love to drink milk and dairy products. And so, what we do on those farms is going to be so critical so that we continue to have that good, wholesome food in front of folks. So if you're ready for that enhanced biosecurity, you can visit any of the secure food supply websites listed here, milk, beef, pork, and sheep and wool, for more information on enhanced biosecurity. The tools are there, and the veterinarians are a great resource to help get our producers to the level they need to be. The topics, if you were to pick up any one of those, align very much with what we talked about earlier. So this perimeter buffer area, line of separation, that's all about protecting your herd and protecting your flock. So wherever we can, we try to make alignment with that information. And next, we'll turn it over to Dr. Kaisand to wrap us up here.
Sure. And so what happens when enhanced biosecurity is not in place, or even good biosecurity practices? So if your farm becomes infected with a foreign animal disease, we're using this opportunity to make sure that, if you do have anything suspicious on your farm, any odd clinical signs, please report that immediately, because as in all our discussions with foreign animal diseases, the sooner we react and understand if we have an introduction of a foreign animal disease, the greater chance we have of stopping the spread and even stamping out and eradicating that foreign animal disease before it gets going. So IDALS has some contact numbers here, office hours and after hours, as well as the USDA. It doesn't matter who you call, and if you want to call your local veterinarian and report, and then they know who to call, that's fine too. But it's just, time is critical. What we do next is we come out and do a foreign animal disease investigation on the farm, take samples, and find out if it is a foreign animal disease or if it's not. And again, we're more than happy to do those investigations. They're free, they're confidential. We don't diagnose other diseases. We just rule out foreign animal diseases. But we would encourage, at any point in time you have anything that looks odd, to please report it. So again, some of those we have on our website. When we mentioned earlier, those biosecurity things that we talked about also fit into some of the things that we'll ask during a foreign animal disease outbreak, some of those records, some of those pieces of information. So on our website for swine, we have some movement risks. We have the trace in, trace out information, and we prioritized in order of which ones we feel the high priority of pieces of information we'll ask. So some of the examples of high priority are live animal movements on and off of farms, some of those animal products. We've mentioned rendering, mortality collection, employees that move farm to farm or could move farm to farm. Is there any history of international travel? But if you have any questions, it's on our website. There's a link there for it. But we'd encourage you to look at it and at least be aware of it, because it contains a lot of the pieces of information, and it applies to all species of things. We'll ask pieces of information if you do become infected with a foreign animal disease. So I guess the last piece that I'll leave with is for everybody to think about. And some of you maybe you've never watched the movie, but I always relate back to the movie Caddyshack. And at the end of the movie, Danny Noonan's getting ready to make a putt that's either going to win or lose. And he looks to Chevy Chase, and Chevy Chase says, "See the ball, be the ball, control your destiny." So I hope as we've gone through this today that the importance of biosecurity, what you should have on the farm. So that last line of defense is, that firewall at the front of your farm. So every producer has the ability to control their destiny. And we'd encourage everybody to make sure you have a good biosecurity plan in place on your farm. Hopefully we've identified some resources that you could use to help in that process, but we would just encourage everybody to make sure you have a good biosecurity plan in place on your farm.
Thanks so much, Dr. Kaisand. And we'll open it up to questions. So go ahead and use the Q&A or the chat feature, whichever one works good for you. We did have a question come in about, what is the recommendation for quarantine time for new animals that are brought on? It's a great question to talk about with your veterinarian. There's a range, right? The 3 weeks to, 21 to 30 days is pretty common. That catches a lot of the diseases, but your veterinarian is your infectious disease expert, right? They know incubation periods, know your herd, vaccination status, all of those kinds of things. So great conversation to have with them to figure out what would be ideal based on what you're buying and what your herd health status is coming in. Dr. Kaisand, would you have any additional recommendations on quarantine times?
That was spot on answer. I would just strongly encourage you to work with your herd veterinarian, that they check with the source flock and herd, understand what your potential exposures are to disease, and then what, Dr. Bickett-Weddle, as you mentioned, incubation periods and how long. So ranges are 30 to 60 days, but work with your veterinarian and figure out what's best for your farm.
Excellent. Okay. Not seeing any additional questions, so really appreciate the opportunity to share information with you today. Thanks to IDALS for doing these. And any final comments, Dr. Kaisand?
Just want to thank everyone for spending the time today, and hopefully that some of the resources we have identified would be of benefit, but we appreciate everybody's time today.
Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great day.